And welcome into this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Here we go now on this Thursday, January the 30th. The year is 2020. I'm Brian Coudsword. We got a lot to get to on the show today. Another free agent signing to break down, which we'll get to. One of the managerial vacancies has been filled just yesterday. We'll get to that. Also, continuing our series of the top 5 right now, where today we'll have our picks for the best players at the positions of catcher and second base, plus this day in baseball history, a tribute to the late Kobe Bryant, and more. But we begin with something a little bit different today, and you know that if you've been listening to this podcast throughout the baseball offseason, that the name Dylan DaPrato often comes up, especially at the end when we're wrapping up, and that's because, as I mentioned during our first podcast, that after all, I'm using his setup, and Dylan was kind enough to stop by for the start of the show today to talk about some different things. We'll get to some baseball conversation and others, but Dylan, welcome. It's kind of strange welcoming you to your own house, but good to have you here on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, man. Listen, I love letting any good friends use the setup, and you're really the first person who's taken me up on the offer, and the drive that you have to do this every week. I absolutely respect it, and thank you for having me on, man.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Now, let's get to what your big work is, and you've developed a considerable following with all your YouTube work, working with Yugioh. So I wanted you to tell the audience here, because my audience obviously not as much familiar as your audience, but how you got into doing all this Yugioh stuff, and what was kind of the inspiration at the start, and how it's taken off for you.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. For those that don't know, I run a channel called Yugioh Everything. And that channel has amassed 65,000 subscribers at this point. I think we actually just broke 65 a few days ago. And over like 18 million total channel views. It really has been insane. I've been doing it for a few years now. And yeah, the inspiration was our friend Pete. You know Pete very well. We just went to Florida with him not too long ago. And he had a YouTube channel, and he knew that I used to do YouTube back in high school. And when I did YouTube in high school, it was like, Super Mario games, and I would do like walkthroughs of those games. So I always had a drive to make content. I always had a content creation drive. And so when he created his channel called Clueless Gamers, he really wanted me to get on board and help him out and do videos, and I caved. He asked me so much, I was like, all right, I'll do videos. So I did some video games, and at the time, I had just gotten back into Yu-Gi-Oh, watching through the various shows. I was watching it subbed, which is, English subtitles in Japanese, and I really, really loved it. I loved the shows. I've always loved the anime, and I looked on YouTube if there were any, like, anime-related videos, and there wasn't. And this was like 2015. This wasn't that long ago. And I was like, wow, this is like an untapped market. So I uploaded like a top 5 duels video just to see how it did on Pete's channel. And it got a few thousand views. And I was like, wow, there's definitely a market here. And so I started doing episode reviews for the current shows. Right now, kind of in limbo because the next show doesn't start until April. So I'm just waiting for that show to start to get daily content back. But did episode reviews, would do episode discussions, theories, top 10 lists, you name it. And yeah, the channel's really blown up. The community, I've made a lot of great friends in the community. The community's been incredible to me. And yeah, I always feel very blessed when I think about it. And yeah, I'm just very thankful that it worked out.
Yeah, congratulations on all your success in building up a following. That's something that's really hard to do. But kind of take us through the day-to-day individual work of what you do. I know there's a lot of different activities that you do with each of the things you break down. Just kind of take us through each of the assignments, how you prepare them, and the work that goes into it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know if I've ever really been asked a question like that before. And I think the tricky thing with YouTube and being your own boss is that motivation can be tough. It's not like you're working for someone. Like if you're working in a company, if you're working at like a Subway, you have a boss and you have a assigned set of tasks. Excuse me, tripping over my words. And you know what you have to do. With YouTube and content creation, there's so many different topics to talk about. There's so many different things that you could talk about. And you're always trying to make content that you enjoy making, and that content that's also going to be viewed very, widely by people. Obviously, you're trying to get your brand out there more and talk about things that you think people are going to find interesting. So if an episode airs, on a day an episode airs, I watch the episode, I do audio, I edit the audio, I put pictures to the audio, and that's my review. That takes about 2 hours. If I'm making a scripted top 10 video, I have to think of the idea. After I think of the idea, I have to make the top 10 list, which takes longer than people would think. So you make the top 10 list, and once that's finalized, then you start working on the script. So it takes me about an hour to maybe think of a topic and then make a top 10 list. And then the script ends up being about 5 to 6 pages, single-spaced, 10-point font. Just to put in perspective, that's like if your teacher said, hey, I want you to do a 10-page, double-spaced essay in Times New Roman. That's about how much scripting goes into one 10-minute video. Yeah, wow indeed. So the scripting can take anywhere from an hour and a half to 5 hours. Then you have to audio edit, and the audio is easy because you're just reading off the script, but you still have to, emote and do kind of a little bit of voice acting to have emotion in the script. You don't want to just be, oh, the red brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. You don't want to just read in a very monotone voice. Mm-hmm. So you got to bring a little life to the script. That's not too hard for me. But then you have to audio edit. That audio process takes about 45 minutes to an hour, and then you have to video edit. And editing top 10 lists is more difficult because you have to, use a good amount of transitions, use amount of clips, video clips, cool pictures, again, cool transitions to make the video actually appealing to watch instead of just listen to. So a whole scripted video, if I worked straight through, would take me about 10 hours to do.
Well, I'll tell you.
That's one video.
That's even more work than I thought even went into it.
Yeah.
I'm a little dizzy listening to all
Yeah,
that.
no, it's dizzying to explain it. And, as I've gotten older, I'm 25, I'm talking like I'm 70. I definitely break it up into portions where I'll script one night for a few hours, and then I'll audio edit the next day, and then I'll video edit the day after. The thing with that is it takes you 3 or 4 days to do one video. And so that kind of sucks because with YouTube, it's really important, at least in my field, to pump out content as fast and as daily as you can. And so there's a lot of stress that goes into it, but there's also a lot of passion. And if I wasn't passionate about the show and the series and the people that watch my channel, I wouldn't have the drive anymore to do it. But I still have just as much drive as I did back when I first started.
Now, your work has gotten the attention of some actual actors from the show.
Yes.
You've actually gotten to meet face-to-face some of the actors who take part. That has to be a pretty exhilarating experience.
Yeah, it was something surreal that when I first started, I never thought it would ever happen, but the voice actors for the English dub, so obviously the show is done in Japan, it's made in Japan, and then for Western audiences over here in America, there's a team that dubs it in English. That's what probably most people are familiar with when they think of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the English dub rather than the subbed version, even though most of my content focuses on the subbed version. But I have a lot of respect for the English dub and all the actors that work on it, and I consider a lot of the actors that work on it now, friends, like in real life friends. I've met them, I've had them over my house, I've gotten dinner with them, Barrett Letty, Daniel J. Edwards, Sam Black, just to name a few. Really great people, really down to earth, and they're just as passionate about the community as I am. So it's been surreal. It's been really amazing.
Yeah, that's really good stuff, and obviously you've been at work now for quite a number of years and put out a lot of great content. What do you hope to do in the future? Do you hope to make a career of this?
You know what? I don't think that this is something that I would do exclusively. Right now, I work at Hilton. And I can work anywhere from 8 hours a week, which is just one day, to 40 hours a week. There's some days where people go on vacations and they need me as a full-time employee. That job mainly is part-time, just to help with the expenses. And, with YouTube, it's been pretty lucrative, but New Jersey's not cheap. It's like living in New York or California. And what I make on YouTube, if I was in a different state, maybe Georgia or Florida, a state that has less expenses, less property taxes, and just the cost of living is cheaper, I probably could do YouTube full-time. But I also like talking to people. The thing with doing YouTube is it can be very lonely. If you picture the schedule and you think about me doing YouTube 5 days a week, I'm by myself in my basement talking into a microphone and writing on my laptop for 5 hours by myself.
Right.
At least with a job like the one I have at Hilton, I can talk to guests, I can talk to coworkers, and even if it's just once or twice a week, I can get out there. Mm-hmm. So even if YouTube was something that I could do full-time, I think I would always be content doing YouTube as like a 70% priority and doing another job part-time a few days a week just to get out of the house a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of great insight there, and keep up the great work with all that
Thank
you're
you.
doing.
Thank
Want
you.
to switch gears to a couple other topics. As you know, this is a baseball, I wouldn't say exclusive show, because we're
Baseball
covering some other
focus.
things. Baseball focus,
Sure.
good way to put it. We know you're a baseball fan, a
Yes.
fan of the New York Mets.
I am.
Now, this offseason hasn't been overly exciting. Couple
No.
of modest upgrades, pitching-wise, bullpen. What's kind of your overall thoughts on what they've done this offseason?
Well, I'm fed up with it. I mean, you worded it very kindly, but I'm fed up with it. This is a New York... You know what? If we were living in Maine or Vermont, I'd be a little more understanding of it. This is a New York City baseball team, and I'm sick of the whole, they're a small market team in a big city. Well, you know what? We need new owners, and I'm glad it looks like we are getting new owners in a few years. And that owner already said we're spending out the wazoo. We're spending like an actual New York team, which is what I want them to do. Look, there's a salary cap, so right. So you're not the whole notion of buying championships. I don't really believe in it. I think if you have the money to spend, if you're in a market that allows you to spend that kind of money, look at the players that Philadelphia brings in, the players that Atlanta brings in. I mean, those aren't as big cities as New York. You would think New York has a bigger, whole income to spend, a bigger spending budget, that was the term I'm looking for. And yet, if your division rivals are spending out the wazoo, Washington, the Nationals always bring in these, we need to match up with them. And it's so frustrating because we're right on that playoff brink, where if we brought in one or two more superstars, we would be a front runner for the NL East. But because we haven't done anything, I could see it being another third or fourth place year. I really wanted Anthony Rendon. That was the one player I really wanted. And I knew, classic Mets, we're not going after him, we're not going to get him. And we didn't get him, and the Angels got him, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so I'm very disappointed. And yeah, Lance Lynn and all these, minor upgrades, no, it's not enough.
So the move within reason that you would like to see them make would be what?
Well, right now,
Yeah.
Chris Bryant.
Okay.
I just talked to you about it.
Yeah.
And I know it would be trading, but you know what? How much would you even have to give up for him? I don't think the Cubs want him after all this.
No.
I mean, it would be obviously you want him, he's a great player, but after this whole lawsuit, which I didn't even know was going on until I saw it, I think, yesterday. I think actually John's Twitter, I saw it,
Right.
just that he lost and that he would be traded. We need a third baseman. We lost Frazier. I don't know who's going to play third base. McNeil maybe, but McNeil can play anywhere.
Yeah.
So he's not a focused third baseman. Oh my God, it'd just be such a great fit. Add some power in the middle of the lineup. We get Cespedes back. I mean, it could, and Pete Alonso. It could be a genuinely, really terrifying lineup if we added one more big bat. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would like to have Chris Bryant on the team.
You're the more realistic Met fan than between the two of us.
I don't know that the Mets are going to go in that direction, and I'm sure you're not going to be happy to hear that one team that's been kind of in the mix for him is the Braves.
I'm not
Of course,
surprised.
a division
I'm
rival.
not surprised at all. I didn't even hear that, but they're going to get him. Because
So-
that's what always happens. 5 more years and we get a new owner, and then all this nonsense is over. It was
Yeah.
25 years of nonsense.
As far as big moves the rest of this offseason, I don't really anticipate the Mets making any kind of big move.
Yeah.
I think if they do anything else, it'll be on the smaller scale. And really all they've done is add a couple back-end starting pitchers
Yeah.
and then Dylan DaPrato, which is enough to have Brody Van Wagenen chirping. They're going to have one of the best bullpens in the league, which obviously remains to be seen. A lot has to go right for that to happen. But
You know what the good general managers do?
what's that?
They don't talk. They don't make statements
You're
like
right.
this. What does Robert Kraft make statements like this? And I hate Robert Kraft. I hate the New England Patriots. But the top executives should not be, chirping their mouth and almost putting like a target on your own players' backs.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
you think the Phillies like hearing that? Like, oh, the Mets GM thinks they're gonna have we're gonna show that. It encourages other teams.
Right, and I think the thing you have to understand about Brody is that he comes from being an agent, which
Right.
is a totally different
Right.
position. That's why it was
Yeah.
such an outside-the-box move for the Mets to bring him in, and there's going to be a learning process for him in his early years as a general manager. So right now, win projection number for the 2020 Mets.
Do you want me to be optimistic or pessimistic?
I want you to be whatever you think.
85.
Yeah, that's
85.
about what I would say. I think right now I put my number because on MLB Network they were forecasting each of the teams in the NL East, ranking them 1 through 5. And right before they did it, I kind of jotted down my own thoughts. I put the Mets in 4th at 83 wins.
And MLB Network said...
Right around what you had, 85, 86. The thing is, the division, like you talked about earlier, it's difficult.
Yeah,
the Phillies have gotten better. You have the defending champions. The Braves aren't going anywhere. It's going to be tough to compete.
Yeah, that's the most frustrating part. And if you're in a very good stacked division like that, you have to make moves. I mean, Betances, all right, I'm fine with that, but Porcello and Lance Lynn, that's what you're going to try to...
Waka.
It was Michael Waka, not Porcello, it was Waka.
Porcello and Waka.
Oh, it wasn't
Lance
Lynn.
Lynn.
Why did I think we got Lance Lynn? But you know what? That's my point. That's how irrelevant. Well, I apologize for saying Lance Lynn earlier. I guess so. I mean, they were both Cardinals. That's probably what it was. Waka and Lynn. I guess I got those two confused. Regardless, that's how irrelevant it is. It's just so such a shame and a disappointment. And pitching isn't really what we needed an upgrade in. We needed, I just think, one more big bat, and we didn't get anyone.
Yeah.
Starling Marte, what the hell was that?
Well, he went up with Arizona.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
These guys were available, and we just didn't...
So one thing that's kind of interesting, though, is Cespedes has these high expectations for himself. Now, I kind of temper expectations for him because we haven't seen him. Seems like years.
No expectations
But he's going out and talking like he's going to have a 40-home run season.
Well, he's excited to hit those new balls. That's what it is.
Well, that might be part of it. But also, you know what? He might be extra motivated because it's a contract year. And he might be extra motivated for that reason. All right, so we'll see what happens with the Mets. Always interesting being a Met fan, right? Seems to be more interesting being a Met fan than any of the other 29 franchises.
Yeah.
People like to pick on us.
Yeah, well, we're the butt of a lot of jokes.
Exactly.
Rightfully so. I mean, we're a joke franchise at times.
Well, season will be here before we know it. Spring training within a few weeks. All right, one final thing before we let you go. And again, we thank you for joining us at the start of the show today.
Thank you.
The big game on Sundays, the Super Bowl, of course, with the San Francisco 49ers, Kansas City Chiefs. I'm really looking forward to this game. I think it's going to be a heck of a game. You look at the Chiefs offense, the 49ers defense, the excitement of Mahomes, so many storylines, so many great individual matchups. What strikes you about it?
Yeah, I'm very excited. What strikes me is a great defense versus a great offense. And I'm really hoping the Niners were in a couple shootouts this year. I thought back to when the Niners...
Orleans,
that's the game, that's the one that I thought. That was like a 41-38 shootout. And that the Saints had a very good offense until the Vikings. I don't know what happened in that game. You want to talk about flat and the Saints were my pick in the NFC. My pick was Saints-Chiefs, so the Saints just laid an egg. But I'm just hoping that it turns into a shootout. And I know the Niners are capable of putting up a lot of points. So are the Chiefs. That's what strikes me. I think if it's going to be a blowout, I actually think it's going to be the Niners blowing the Chiefs out.
Interesting.
I think to win the Chiefs, I think they hosted the Colts and they put up 13 points with Patrick Mahomes as the starter. So they've had a couple duds this season. Not in a while. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is a phenomenal player. But I just feel like they're, especially an Andy Reid team in the playoffs, I just feel like there's always that capability of a dud. I really hope this is not like Niners-Packers 2 weeks ago where the game was over at halftime. I'm rooting for my numbers, though. You want to know one of the numbers that I have?
What's that?
9-9. What a horrific number.
Gotta hope for a lot of field goals.
Yeah, or 59-49 just shootout. And then my other number is 7-4, so that's a pretty good one.
Much better.
But geez, yeah, so I'm rooting for the numbers. I don't have a rooting interest in this game. I'm just hoping it's a very good game.
Do you lean one way or the other?
I lean Niners.
Prediction?
I lean Niners, yeah. Okay. I had to pick straight up. I know the Chiefs are like a point favorite.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a pick-em at game time. I think Niners are going to win.
Yeah, should be fascinating. Really looking forward to it. Well, Dylan, thanks so much for coming on. We covered a lot of good topics, all your great work with Yugioh, some baseball talk, Super Bowl. We hope to have you on again as the season approaches, and thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, man. Keep up the good work, man.
All right, Dylan DaPrato joining us on the show today. We'll resume our Brian on Baseball podcast coming up. Our thanks again to Dylan for joining us today. And now as we continue along on our baseball show, talked about in the open another free agent signing of significance to break down. It seems that we've averaged about one marquee free agent signing for each show here as we've gone along in the offseason, and this week, once again, it was the Cincinnati Reds' turn. The Reds, who've been one of the busiest teams this offseason, and this week agreeing to terms with free agent outfielder I almost said Nicholas Castellanos, but apparently he wants to go again by Nick, and it is a 4-year deal worth $64 million. Now, the Reds, early on in the offseason, they went out. What did they do? Bring in Mike Moustakas for a contract of similar terms as this Castellanos deal is. Little bit of an outside-the-box move considering Cincinnati's plan to play Moustakas primarily at second base when he's been a third baseman in his career. But Cincinnati went into the offseason, and the number one goal was to upgrade an offense that they thought underperformed, if not the talent just wasn't there last season. And it was a team that had a very good pitching staff and figures to have one of the better pitching staffs in the game going into this season. So now if you combine that with a pretty good lineup, all of a sudden you have a team that can be a force to be reckoned with in the National League Central, a division that overall has seen a lot of the teams kind of remain quiet this offseason. We have not seen the Cubs be overly active. The St. Louis Cardinals, the Pirates are in full-on rebuild mode. The Brewers are kind of retooling on the fly as they've said goodbye to a lot of familiar faces. And so you look at the division right now, and Cincinnati probably has the leg up considering now the lineup with the pitching staff. I think they're going to get steady production out of Castellanos. Now, I'm not sure they're going to get what we saw from him last year, especially in the second half after going to the Cubs by way of Detroit when he pretty much set the world on fire, leading the league in doubles, had over 1,000 OPS in his run in Chicago, and that got him this big contract. Now, he's probably not that guy, but I think he's a steady bet for solid production, and they already have some other big bats in that lineup with Moustakas and with Eugenio Suarez, who's a monster power threat, and some other young players that they're hoping take a step forward. I think a big key for Cincinnati, what do they get out of Joey Votto? Because the last couple of years, it really has looked like he has been in decline. But if there's that one last hurrah for Votto that he can kind of turn back the clock and have a big season, that would go a long way in making this team a big threat in that division. But you have to like what Cincinnati has done. You have to like that they were one of these rebuilding teams that has now made their move, ready to take that next step, and they're showing why this offseason. They've been aggressive, they've added players, they've upgraded their lineup, and look, this rotation led by Luis Castillo and Trevor Bauer and a resurgent Sonny Gray, pretty good. So I look at the Reds, and if not the favorite in this division, they should at least be in the mix for a wild card spot. And again, you have to like, if you're a Reds fan, what they've done upgrading their team, identifying an area of weakness, an area that needed substantial upgrades, and they've done that. They've made their lineup better. Castellanos is a very good hitter. He's not a great fielder. I think they'll kind of move him around different spots in the outfield, left and right. Remains to be seen now what happens with one of their highly touted young players, Nick Senzel. Some thought that he might be on the trading block with the addition of Castellanos now, but they got a lot of pieces. Versatility is one of the names of the game right now. This helps the Reds in that regard. And all in all, a good move for Cincinnati, inking Castellanos for the next 4 years. And now moving on to another transaction through the past week, and it was just a couple of days ago, and talked briefly about this in our spot with Dylan. That is the outfielder Starling Marte, who this week was traded to the Arizona Diamondbacks for 2 prospects. Both of the prospects were in the top 10 in the Arizona system, now find themselves in Pittsburgh. Now, in this area, the reaction after this trade was not overly favorable because Marte had been one name that the Mets were supposedly mulling trading for as well. I was on the fence about something like that for a couple different reasons, one of which is the PED past of Marte and the fact that the Mets already have one of those guys in Robinson Cano. You don't need too many PED users. So I was kind of against it from that standpoint. And also, when you look at the Mets, I think you have to just hand the reins to Brandon Nimmo and hope for the best. And look, on MLB Network's top 10 right now, Nimmo found his way as a top 10 center fielder. There's potential there. There's a reason people are high on him, and we've seen it in limited samples so far, what he can do when healthy, hitting atop of the order, being an igniter. He's shown some power. Doesn't have one tool that overly stands out, but I think the potential to be a good, solid major league player with the upside of even more. And so why not stick with that plan than to go with a 30-something player who you only have for a couple of years of control, who you'd have to give up assets to get? I'm okay with the Mets not pulling the trigger for a move like that. And so Marte winds up in the desert. Look, Arizona, a team like Cincinnati, they're trying to be competitive, and they recognize they're in a tough spot because they're behind the Dodgers in the National League West, and the Dodgers figure to win upwards of 100 games, and they've dominated the division for seemingly the last decade. But Arizona says, you know what, we're going to try to put the best team out there that we possibly can. And even though they've lost pieces along the way the last couple of years, traded off Paul Goldschmidt, Zach Greinke, these were face-of-the-franchise type players, the thing that's been consistent about them is their replacements have done the job. And when they traded Goldschmidt, they got their long-term answer behind the plate in Carson Kelly. So this is a team that's found a way to be very efficient, if not overly talented. They're very well run by their front office. Torey Lovello, I think, is one of the best managers in the game. And I don't know exactly how good the Diamondbacks are, but I applaud them for trying. And of course, the Bumgarner move makes that clear as well. With Starling Marte in the fold, it allows Ketel Marte, who had just a tremendous year for them a season ago, to move back to what is probably his more natural position at second base. They're a very strong defensive club. You look at the infield Gold Glovers with Nick Ahmed at short. Eduardo Escobar's kind of found himself in a Diamondback uniform. Christian Walker, a breakthrough season a year ago. So there's a lot to like about this Arizona team, a farm system that is on the rise despite trading a couple of their top-tier guys to get Marte. But look, this team figures to be competitive, and you have to applaud teams that aren't content to sit back and just be content piling up the losses and getting high draft picks and saying, we're not worried about this year, we'll be better next year. No, teams like the Reds and the White Sox and the Diamondbacks aren't doing that. They're saying, we're going to try to be as competitive as possible this year and see where it takes us. And you have to like that mindset, and these kind of moves support that theory. So Arizona able to land the former Pittsburgh Pirate and join a second Marte as members of the Diamondbacks. And now let's get to a couple other news and notes from around the game. There were a plethora of signings in the last week, a lot of them minor league deals. We're not going to get to all of them. We'll kind of highlight the biggest impact ones over the last several days. And Mitch Moreland, the first baseman, is back with the Boston Red Sox on a one-year deal. Pablo Sandoval, who's kind of an icon in San Francisco, he re-signs with the Giants on a one-year deal. And it's interesting with Sandoval how good his early years were in San Francisco. Is one of the better players in the game. Of course, was a part of championship-winning teams there. Then he hit free agency. He went to Boston, got that big contract. It didn't work out. What happened? He found himself back with the Giants, refound himself, and he's at least a useful player again, whether it's a bench player. He's played a lot the last couple of years for the Giants, albeit on losing teams, but it just seems that sometimes there's that home for a player where you didn't realize it was as important as it was until you've left, and I think that's what Pablo Sandoval found out when it came to the Giants. The Mets make a minor league deal with the veteran infielder Eduardo Nunez, who the last few years was in Boston, and the Kansas City Royals, and what has been a lot of reunions recently. They brought back Alex Gordon, while they bring back one of their old friends, the closer Greg Holland, who's bounced around since leaving Kansas City, Colorado, St. Louis, Arizona, among others, and now back with the Royals on a minor league deal. Also, as mentioned earlier, Dylan referenced this, that Chris Bryant lost his service time grievance, and so what does that mean? 2 years of control remain for the third baseman instead of 1. That was the expected outcome all along, and now it remains to be seen what the future holds for the All-Star, whether the Cubs will pull the trigger on a trade or keep him long-term, but seems the odds are against that considering he's coming up on free agency and they got a lot of players to pay there, Javi Baez, among others, in Chicago. So we'll see what happens there. And then also, as first reported by Pedro Gomez of ESPN, that Major League umpires, starting at some point in the upcoming season, are going to be mic'd and announce decisions on replay reviews to the crowd at the stadium. And I really like this. You see this in football and in hockey. With all the reviewing now, there's a lot of complex rules out there, and I think it's an asset when you have the decision maker be able to let the audience know what the decision actually was and allow for some clarification. So I think a good move there. Remains to be seen if it will be in effect for opening day. I've heard that the umpires will have to be trained on this, and so it might not be in the immediate, but the thought is at some point this season that will be new for Major League Baseball, the umpires announcing decisions that go to review. And then also this just breaking within the last day or two that the Mookie Betts trade rumors are picking up some steam, and the latest rumor has the Dodgers as a potential suitor. Andy McCullough wrote about this in The Athletic. Would be fascinating to see. Another team that has come up in the mix for Betts services, another team in the National League West, also in California, is the Padres. So we'll see if the Red Sox pull the trigger. Obviously would be a mammoth trade, would involve prospects of significance, and also the possibility of the Red Sox attaching David Price as part of the deal, considering they want to clear money and get under the luxury tax threshold. So a lot of pieces in place for a potential deal there, and it seems like form may be starting to take shape as far as that goes, something that bears watching regarding the Red Sox superstar right fielder. And now moving on, because one of the managerial vacancies due to the sign-stealing scandal has been filled, as just yesterday and first reported by Bob Nightingale of the USA Today, that the Houston Astros have named Dusty Baker their new manager. It is a one-year deal for the veteran skipper with a mutual option. And this was absolutely hands down the right move for the Astros. And I talked last week about the Mets and their decision to hire Luis Rojas and opt not to go for experience. You know where I stand on that matter. I would have been good with Dusty managing the Mets or someone with experience, but this is the case that cries out for experience, where you need a steady hand to enter the situation. And any way you slice it, it's going to be tough when the season begins for the Houston Astros with all the turmoil that is surrounding the organization. And who better than an experienced manager to take over and kind of calm the storm, if you will, surrounding this team? Dusty, who is just a proven manager. Everywhere he goes, he wins. He takes teams to the playoffs. He's managed 4 teams in the past. What do they all have in common? They've all gone to the postseason. Now, as I talked about last week also, he's yet to win a World Series. He's had his shortcomings in the playoffs overall, but he's one of the winningest managers in the game's history to not yet win a World Series. And Houston recognized that this was the direction they needed to go in, as opposed to promote a Joe Espada, which would not have made sense on a lot of levels considering he was on the staff when the sign-stealing scandal was going on. It wouldn't make sense to promote somebody within, although, as we know, Espada is staying on as the bench coach, but better to get an outside voice, and an outside voice with as much experience and a winning pedigree as Dusty Baker. I think it's just a great fit, a guy who's managed so many different personalities, from Barry Bonds to Bryce Harper and Sammy Sosa and everyone in between. Now he manages a lot of these Astros who have high egos and really is tasked with calming things down, settling things down, and this would make me feel better about the Astros' chances going into the new year. We know they have a lot of talent. We know there's going to be a lot of questions to answer when the team takes the field, but having a steady hand like Dusty, I think, will go a long way with the roster that they have on paper to keeping the Astros as potentially one of the elite teams in the game, even though I do think they are going to take somewhat of a step back. The loss of Garrett Cole obviously looms huge to the pitching staff, and I think there still will be some semblance of a psychological impact on the toll that this has taken on the ball club, but an A-plus hire, bringing in Dusty all the way around, I think it made a lot of sense. It seemed that everyone the Astros were interviewing during this process was experienced guys, whether it was Buck Showalter, John Gibbons, and they settle on Baker as the choice. Don't commit to him for a long time, but I think it makes sense. See how this year plays out, see how everything goes. But in my view, and I think the view of most baseball people, this was the right move for Houston. So Dusty Baker back in the game, which is good to see. He's a very popular figure within the game, been a very successful figure in the game, and deserves a chance to stay in the game and not be a victim of teams going so much new school. And I think that's another underrated part about this, is allowing one of the old school guys to stay in the game. And even though it may have taken a situation like this, Dusty will take it. Houston has their manager. And now continuing our top 5 right now, and following the MLB Network series, the top 10 right now, where we'll have today our picks at catcher and second base. So as I did last week, I'm going to list what the shredder, who's the big decision maker when it comes to the TV program, give what the shredder has for each of those positions, starting with behind the plate, which this is a position that's very difficult to rank because there's just not a lot of standout players. And you got some of the elder statesmen like Yadier Molina, and what do you do with him at his age and not as much of an offensive contributor? It's a position where clearly you value defense and intangibles more than anything else, and so in that regard it makes it tough to make a list, but we'll do our best here following what the shredder picks. And for catcher, their list goes as follows, with Yasmani Grandal taking the top spot, JT Realmuto right behind him, the Cubs' Wilson Contreras at number 3, Mitch Garver following a breakout year in Minnesota at number 4, with the Yankees' Gary Sanchez at 5, and if you go a 6 deep, you find the New York Mets' Wilson Ramos. Now I'm going to do something a little different for my order. I flip-flopped the top 2 picks of the shredder and went JT Realmuto number 1. I think I made that pretty clear when talking about the Phillies catcher throughout this podcast, that to me he just impacts the game more than any other catcher because of the athletic component he brings, speed component, great receiver behind the plate, good solid hitter, 20 to 25 home run power. I think he's the best all-around catcher in the game, and potential to get even better, still very much in the prime of his career, and I just really like this player. So I go the Phillies' JT Realmuto with the slight edge over Grandal, who gets the plus for being an excellent pitch framer and the fact that he hits from both sides of the plate and has power both sides of the plate, but to me just doesn't quite impact the game as much as Realmuto, so I give him the nod over the new Chicago White Sox in Grandal. And the other Chicago catcher, I'm going to agree with the shredder and put in the number 3 spot, a guy who has outstanding offensive ability, breakout season a year ago, has kind of come into his own, and I think an easy choice to put in the top 3. And then right behind him, I'm going to go with the Yankees' Gary Sanchez, 1 spot above where the shredder has him. A guy who is an enigma, let's face it, because his power is prodigious, and there is no other catcher in baseball with the potential to hit 40-plus home runs. Sanchez has that kind of ability. I think the only thing that slows down Gary Sanchez is Gary Sanchez himself. He seems to get into his own head. He takes it with him defensively behind the plate, where he has a rocket of a throwing arm, but just doesn't always seem to be quite in the game. Too many pass balls. The focus doesn't always seem to be there. And even offensively, despite the great power, it seems that he's just too streaky. He has these red-hot streaks where you can't get him out, and he's hitting home runs left and right. And then these cold streaks where he looks like he's completely lost at the plate. But the potential is so immense with this guy that I think if he figures it out, both sides of the plate, he can be the number 1 catcher. That's the kind of talent that he has, and it's just those kind of things that are holding him back and keeping him from being in the top 3 right now. And then I'm going to do something a little different to round out my top 5 catcher, and I admit this is a pick based on track record and pedigree, but I'm putting Buster Posey as the number 5 guy, and my reason being, there's no other catcher that strikes me as someone who absolutely needs to be in the top 5. It's not Mitch Garver, who's only done it for 1 year. It's not Wilson Ramos, who's not very good on the defensive side. So why not go with Posey and the accomplishments that he has? And I get it. He's been kind of declining the last couple of years, and there's some question of whether he will stick behind the plate in his older years, and he's played more first base lately. But I think the last couple of years he's been banged up. He's battled a lot of injuries. And to me, there still is potential there for him to have a couple more really good seasons. And he still is a really good player, even being limited the last couple of years. So I don't see anyone else that I see on this list and say they have to go ahead of Posey, who's won 3 world championships, who's won an MVP, who's won a Rookie of the Year, who's been about as steady a presence for a winning team as there's been in the game over the last decade. So admittedly, probably a little bit of a sentimental pick here, but I think still deserves the nod as a top 5 catcher. Why not? Buster Posey takes the number 5 spot for me. And then we'll move over to second base, and here are the Shredders' picks for that position. They start with Ketel Marte, and then go with DJ LeMahieu, Jose Altuve, Ozzie Albies, and Brandon Lau. He of the Tampa Bay Rays, and I kind of switched things up here a little bit as well because it's no fun to go with exactly what the Shredder has. Plus, typically I don't agree with the Shredder. I think the Shredder has a little bit of a crazy mind, to be honest with you, but that's beside the point. So for second base, I'm going to start with DJ LeMahieu, and why not after what he did in his first season as Pinstripes? There was some thought that he was kind of a product of Coors Field. Well, boy, did he prove that to be wrong with the year he had in Pinstripes. So clutch. He's been a really good player now for a lot of years, and I think got overlooked in Colorado because of some of the other guys there, but an outstanding defender, was always a good hitter, and took it to a new level in 2019, and I think we'll have another big year this upcoming season. So he gets the edge for me at the number 1 spot. I'll go with Jose Altuve, number 2. Now, quite honestly, Altuve's probably the best player at the position right now. I put him down a peg because of all that's going on with Houston right now and the sign stealing. I think it may have elevated a lot of their players, made them look a little bit better than they actually are. Look, Altuve is an outstanding player any way you slice it. But with all that's surrounding the Astros, I thought it fair to knock him down, so I'll put him at the number 2 spot. Ketel Marte is number 3. And look, the Shredder had him number 1. I'm not taking anything away from Ketel Marte, whose season was unbelievable when you look at the numbers a year ago in Arizona, but I question, what is he going to do for an encore? I mean, this is a player early on in his career was seen as a light-hitting middle infielder in his early days with the Seattle Mariners. Now, there was always a thought that he could blossom and become a pretty good major league player. I don't think anyone saw coming what he did last year, and I'm just not sure he ever is going to quite approach that season. So while I think he's still going to have a very good year, I don't think it's going to be nearly as good, and so I don't put him as the number 1 second baseman. I put him behind the aforementioned LeMahieu and Altuve. And number 4, I'm going to agree with the Shredder and go with Ozzie Albies, who's one of the core players for this Atlanta team to go along with Ronald Acuna and Freddie Freeman and Dansby Swanson and all the pitching that they have in the pipeline, some of which already at the major league level. And Albies you have to look at as a stalwart on this Brave team, going to be there for a long time to come, locked up for a considerable number of years, hits from both sides of the plate, has power both sides of the plate, just a good, solid, all-around player, once a top prospect and showing what he can do now at the major league level, and I think will only get better, very deserving to be among the top 5 second basemen. And I'm going to go with another young player to round out my list at second base and go with the Brewers' Keston Hiura. Give him the slight nod over Brandon Lau. Hiura, we saw what he could do in a limited sample size because he didn't come up until late last season, but another guy, top prospect within that organization, former first rounder, and he just looks the part. He looks like he's going to be a power-hitting offensive powerhouse at the second base position, and there's just not a lot of them. This second base as a whole is not an overly deep position. That's why you look at the Shredders list, and I didn't go through 6 through 10, but guys like Kevin Biggio made the list, and Colton Wong and Luis Arias of the Twins, guys that casual baseball fans might not be infinitely familiar with, but you're soon going to be familiar with Keston Hiura's work and what he does in Milwaukee, and I think he's going to have a big year starting this first full go-round in 2020. So to round out my picks for second base, I'll take the Brewer, and to relist them, I go with DJ LeMahieu, Jose Altuve, Ketel Marte, Ozzie Albies, and Keston Hiura. And with that, let's move into this day in baseball history, and it was on this day back on January the 30th, 1978, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn canceled a trade that would have sent pitcher Vida Blue from the Oakland A's to the Cincinnati Reds for first baseman Dave Revering and cash. Believing the A's did not receive enough compensation for Blue, Kuhn overruled the trade. And now for the ninth inning today, I have a couple of non-baseball notes, starting with the Super Bowl pick, the pick for the big game. We got Dylan's earlier. He's leaning toward the 49ers. I'm going to go the other way and go with Patrick Mahomes and the juggernaut that is this Kansas City offense. I just feel like it's their time right now. Their offense so explosive. Mahomes so much fun to watch. And there's just so many weapons on this offense. I get it. San Francisco has a terrific defense. They can get after the quarterback. But can they keep up with the speed of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and slow down this Chiefs offense? Even if they can for periods of time during this game, I just think Kansas City has that level where they can turn on the switch and go on a big run. And we've seen that in their first couple of games in this playoffs. The ability to come back from deficits, down 24-0 against Houston, down early on against Tennessee, and then once they turn it on, they are just unstoppable. I think it's Mahomes' time right now. I think it's Andy Reid's time to get off the schneid and get that elusive Super Bowl win that his career is sorely missing. And I'm going to go with the Chiefs in a rather high-scoring affair. I'm really looking forward to this game. I think it's going to be a great matchup. I respect the San Francisco defense and all that Kyle Shanahan and company have done to build up this team, but Kansas City a little bit too much for San Francisco to handle. I like the Chiefs 34-27 on Sunday. And finally, to the story that rocked not only the sports world, but the entire world, with the tragedy taking place over the weekend. Helicopter crash north of Los Angeles, killing Kobe Bryant and 8 others on board. And I was out when the news first broke about this, saw the first tweet about it. My reaction, I think, was the reaction everyone had, in sheer shock. This can't possibly happen. But then you realize, as it's confirmed by different people, that it is a reality and it is a tragedy. And even though Kobe Bryant, the most well-known, everyone who lost their lives should be remembered. It's easy to see the kind of impact that Kobe Bryant had, not just on the basketball court, but off of it, and the overwhelming support that has come out of seemingly everyone from all walks of life, basketball or not, the impact that Kobe had on so many people, the global icon that he became, his life that was just getting started outside of basketball. The loss leaves a tremendous void, and for me personally, like many of my generation, he was one of my favorite players to watch. This hit me hard when you see a sports icon go like this. It really hits home, and unfortunately we've dealt with a lot of these through the last couple of years, some in baseball with Roy Halladay and Jose Fernandez involved in their own tragic accidents. But Kobe leaves behind a legacy that very few will reach. My heart goes out to the families of all the victims. We know one junior college baseball coach was among the victims, and one of his children, we know that in addition to Kobe, his 13-year-old daughter was a victim as well. So it's not just Bryant, it's young kids whose lives seemingly were just getting started. Hard to wrap your mind around a tragedy the nature of this. And I think a lot of people looked at Bryant and thought he was invincible, indestructible, but this is a sobering reminder that we're all human beings, we're all vulnerable, nobody is indestructible, and something like this can happen to anybody at any time, and that's why it's just important to be thankful for every day we have and live life to the fullest. And with that, that closes this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. I thank you for joining us today. We'll be back once again next week. So long.